So I wanted to talk a little bit to you about the 5 elements, because when Lisa does her Q&A on Thursday, you're going to be hearing a little bit about the 5 elements as they relate to the different types of foods that we eat. Now that you have some kind of an underpinning of knowledge in the 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, or dryness, heat, and moisture, or mobility, transformation, and stabilization, I'd like to discuss what the 5 elements are in relationship to those 3 things. So, in terms of Vata, or dryness, or mobility, there are 2 elements that Vata manifests itself through. There are 5 elements in total, the Pancha Mahabhutas, but the first 2 are the most subtle, which makes total sense because Vata tends to be associated with movement, with that which you can't really see because it's associated with wind or with air. And that's one of the elements that Vata is associated with. So the 5 elements are ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Vata is anchored in ether, but moves through the vehicle of air. Pitta is a combination of 2 elements. It's a combination of fire and water. So when I talk about about Pitta as transformation, or I talk about Pitta as heat, how does water come into play? Well, Pitta is anchored in water and it expresses itself through fire. If there is not enough water, then the fire will burn away whatever is there. If there is too much water, then the fire is dampened. So there needs to be that right amount of fire and water in order for Pitta to thrive and not to damage any tissues and not to be damaged itself. And then the 3rd dosha, Kapha, is water and earth. And so Kapha dosha is anchored in earth, but manifests itself in its dynamic activity through the element of water. So what does this mean, the 5 elements? What does it mean that they combine to make the doshas? From a really basic point of view, in Ayurvedic medicine, when we are examining a person, especially if we're going to be prescribing herbs, and this is also true of Chinese medicine, we're not just looking at Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, we're looking at the exact elements that are out of balance in the person. So this is pretty important to understand because without the knowledge of the elements as a practitioner, you can't completely fully grasp and understand the nature of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So the 5 elements are basically the underpinnings or the foundation for the periodic table of elements in chemistry. The 5 elements are the substrates for material existence that everything is formed from. So the first element that comes into being is called ether. It's called also Akash or Akasha. And this ether or this Akash can be translated also as space. So not space like outer space, but space like spaciousness, space like the ground of existence, the space that had to exist so that everything could fill it, including air. So space is a very static element. It doesn't move around on its own. It doesn't do anything on its own except to provide the substrate for the rest of existence to manifest. Air is the second element. And air moves through space. And this movement of air through space creates a friction. And we know that when we have friction, what gets generated? Heat or fire. And so that friction generates the fire of Pitta. As Pitta burns, it liquefies, and it's like a molten lava. And this fluid nature is what creates water. And then water has such a cohesive property to it that as water stagnates and solidifies and accumulates mineralization, then that becomes earth. So earth is the last element to form, and earth contains all of the other elements. Water is the second to last element to form, and it contains the elements previous to it. Fire contains air and ether or space, and air contains space or ether. Ether is just ether or space. And so when we're thinking in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, knowing and connecting to the qualities of what spaciousness is, of what the movement of air is, and how we understand air in our environment, just the wind blowing and what that feels like, those two fundamental pieces of information, space and air, they help us to understand Vata even more. And we can understand why, if our Vata is out of balance, when it's windy, it might get worse. Or when it's dry, or when it's cold. Because cold, dry, windy, or mobile, those are the primary qualities of Vata dosha, and that is because they are the qualities of ether and of air. Roughness is another one. With Pitta, we can see why some people's Pitta might feel like it's being aggravated in the summertime, because the temperature is hot and it's humid. So Pitta is fire and water. So Pitta has more of an oily texture to it. So Pitta can aggravate in the summertime for some people if it's already high, because it's hot and it's humid, especially in late summer. And so we understand what fire is. We understand its heat, and it has a quick nature, and it transforms things. We cook things with fire. Things turn to ash with fire. Fire makes something into something else. And then we understand that water can put out fire, water balances fire, and with imagining that proper balance of fire and water, we can see where, if our Pitta is out of balance, if it's too weak in some areas, how there might be more dampness present in our system. And if it's too strong in other areas, that there might not be enough juiciness or fluid in that part of the body, anchoring the fire in. And then with Kapha, we can see how those Kapha tendencies of earth can manifest, in that earth is very stable. And that's part of what we identify with Kapha. Earth is cool, it's heavy, it's dense. And water has movement to it. That's a very Vata quality. And in the Chinese tradition, water has more of Vata qualities to it, but I'm strictly talking about Ayurveda here. Water is recognized as having a very cohesive structure. Water molecules are attracted to each other. When you put 2 drops of water on a table, they try to find their way together and they become one and whole. And that's a very kapha type of thing. Kapha is about sustainability and holding and being rooted and anchored and grounded into the earth. So when we take all of what we know about these elements and we think about those in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, we can understand Vata, Pitta, and Kapha better in ourselves. And this also translates into the tastes. So when we are preparing a meal, it is definitely something we should start putting on the radar to try and bring each of the 5 elements, each of the taste profiles of the 5 elements into our meal. Because while it's important to eat whole foods, and while it's important to eat seasonally, and while if there is a strong imbalance, why it's important to eat according to one's dosha, another general tenet of healthy Ayurvedic eating is trying to incorporate each of the 5 elements or each of the tastes into one's regular meals. So there are actually 6 tastes in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, but the 6th one in each tradition is sort of vague. In Chinese medicine, that 6th one is bland, and in Ayurveda, it's astringent. So we're not going to focus on those 2. What we're going to focus on are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent. Sweet. Pretty much everything is sweet. If it's not bitter, if it's not completely bitter, then there is some sweetness to it. Meat is sweet, breads are sweet, carbs are sweet. In general, lots of things are sweet. We know obviously sugar is sweet. Carrots are a sweeter vegetable. Fruits are sweet. So we need some sweet taste in our diet. And the reason for this, which we don't have time to get into in the 21-day challenge, is because each taste actually stimulates or helps to balance out one of the elements and the doshas. But for now, what's important is that we have a little bit of each taste in every meal, so that you get your palate attuned to what the tastes are and what foods contain them. And many foods contain more than one taste. So sweet is pretty much everything. Sour, lemons, fermented things like sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt. Yogurt has sweet, but it also has sour. Bitter. Bitter things tend to be leafy greens. Bitter things, sour, sweet, salty, they generate tissue in the body. They are anabolic in their activity in the body. Bitter, pungent, astringent, they are catabolic. So bitter and pungent are what we're going to focus on, and bitter helps to clear things out. Pungent helps to clear things out. So bitter things, think leafy greens. Coffee is bitter. That's why people add cream and sugar to it, to soften it, to sweeten it. Salty, obviously, are the various types of salts that we have, and as Lisa talked about in the videos, miso. There are